When I was younger, I was assigned to the midnight shift as a security guard at a massive warehouse in Omaha. The building primarily served as a storage facility, and it was enormous. As security personnel, we had the task of patrolling various stations throughout the building during our shift, which meant a lot of walking. Typically, there were two of us working the night shift. One person patrolling the outside perimeter in a car and the other inside the warehouse on foot. Naturally, being assigned to the outside perimeter was more desirable, as it was more comfortable to sit in a car than walk the long, empty aisles inside. I was working on a Wednesday night, about half an hour into my shift. I started my rounds with a slow walk, taking in the entire facility for an hour before heading to one of the security offices. The room had a low-budget camera system, which at the time felt like high-tech equipment. However, it only had two screens, as there were only two cameras in the whole warehouse, one in the northeast corner and another in the southwest corner. This setup made it impossible to just sit back in the office for the entire shift. We had to be active and vigilant throughout the night. The warehouse was shared by several tech companies, housing valuable equipment. For this reason, security had to be present every night. The layout of the warehouse resembled that of a typical grocery store, with aisles stretching for miles. There were roughly 10 to 15 aisles in total, arranged in a grid-like pattern. I was still making my initial rounds when something caught my eye at the far end of the aisle. It was a white object, almost resembling a head, peeking out from behind the end of the section. It was so far away that all I could make out was the vague shape of the thing. A chill ran down my spine as I quickened my pace. As I approached, the white object vanished behind a tower of boxes. My heart sank. This confirmed my fear that I was not alone. Panic surged through me as I sprinted to the end of the aisle, desperately hoping to spot the other night guard, or maybe even hear something reassuring. Standing in the southwest corner, I glanced up at the camera in the corner, which happened to be aimed in the direction of the unsettling sight I had just witnessed. I turned my gaze, and there it was again, at the far end, near the seventh aisle. The white shape I had seen earlier now appeared much closer. As my heart raced, I could now clearly make out what it was, a face. But it wasn't the other guard, as I had hoped. It was a chillingly pale face, almost ghostly, with a lifeless, ghastly appearance. The face once again disappeared behind the tower of boxes, and I immediately grabbed my walkie-talkie to contact the other guard. He responded quickly, informing me that he was parked near the back section of the parking lot. He assured me he'd be there in 5 minutes. After hanging up, I stood frozen for a moment, conflicted. This was exactly what a security guard's job entailed, yet I had never expected anything like this to happen. But duty called, and I couldn't back down. I forced myself to take a deep breath, then dashed toward the aisle, stopping at the end to peer down it. The person was gone. My heart sank, and I assumed they must have fled. Without wasting any more time, I ran halfway down the aisle, hoping to catch a glimpse of the intruder. But then, something hit me, an unbearable, fetid stench. The air reeked of decay, like a rotting carcass. I followed the smell, each step heavier than the last, until it became overpowering. The source of the odor led me to a large wooden box, distinct from all the others. I cautiously pulled at the box's lid, and what I discovered inside stopped my heart. There, lying in a pool of blood, was a dead body. The most disturbing part of it all was that the body had no head. Panicked, I grabbed my walkie-talkie once again, shouting for the other guard to call the police. I bolted for the back of the warehouse, running faster than I ever had before. I could barely catch my breath, and when I finally stumbled out the door, I couldn't hold it any longer. The shock and the smell overwhelmed me, and I threw up violently. I scrambled to the other guard's car, collapsing into the passenger seat, gasping for air. He was still on the phone with the police, his face pale with disbelief. I grabbed the phone from the other guard and quickly relayed the details to the dispatcher, explaining everything he hadn't mentioned. Within moments, 5 or 6 police cars arrived, surrounding the entire area. The body was carefully removed and loaded into an ambulance, and for a good portion of the night, the police remained inside, conducting their forensic investigation. But what really unnerved me was when we tried to review the security footage from the previous night. The footage mysteriously cut out for nearly 3 hours, right in the middle of the night, with no explanation for the glitch. I couldn't help but dwell on this night for years, the strange events haunting me. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts, but I can't explain what happened that night. I entertained a few wild theories. Perhaps the murderer had been in the warehouse that evening, hiding and holding up the severed head of the victim. That might explain the ghostly, pale face I saw and the unsettlingly unnatural appearance. Just thinking about it now, I shudder. Years later, I was reminded of this night when 2 friends and I heard about an eerie, abandoned warehouse not far from my house. It was a former furniture store, now left to decay. One night, while driving nearby, the 3 of us decided to investigate. We parked at a Walgreens a few hundred yards away and began walking toward the building. As we neared, my friend Jim got cold feet and stayed behind, while Mark and I pressed on. When we reached the right side of the building, it was clear that it had been abandoned for years. The front entrance was boarded up, and ivy had taken over the exterior, covering much of the walls. Our mutual friend had told us that the only way in was through a broken section of the back wall. We went around the building, and sure enough, we found the gap we could crawl through. Stepping inside, we were immediately plunged into darkness. It was so dark that we couldn't even see our hands in front of our faces. We fumbled for our phone flashlights and switched them on, revealing piles of trash and debris scattered across the concrete floor. We ventured deeper into what seemed to be the main area of the old store, and it was massive. The space was so vast that an entire football field could easily fit inside. Our voices echoed off the walls, amplifying the eerie stillness of the place. As we made our way along the walls, we couldn't help but notice the graffiti that covered nearly every surface. It was a chaotic mix of gang symbols and profanities, as you'd expect in a place long forgotten. However, the further we walked, the more disturbing the graffiti became. The messages were darker, more sinister. One scrawled, "Kill yourself tonight," in large, jagged letters. The imagery took a twisted turn as well, with inverted crosses, pentagrams, the number 666, and violent, grotesque scenes drawn haphazardly across the walls. This alone was unsettling enough, but it wasn't the worst thing we encountered. At the far end of the building, a set of stairs led to smaller rooms. As we shone our flashlights down on the steps, we froze. There was a large, dried pool of what was unmistakably blood, smeared across the steps. The sight was chilling, and we decided then that exploring those smaller rooms was no longer an option. Instead, we turned toward the left side of the room. As we walked, our lights landed on something hanging from the ceiling. The closer we got, the more clearly we saw it, a noose, still swinging from one of the rafters. The grim reality of the place settled in. It was clear that whoever came here used it for far darker purposes than we could imagine. We'd seen enough. Deciding we had spent enough time in that nightmare of a building, we made our way back toward the hole in the wall through which we had entered. Once outside, we were met with another surprise. A smaller warehouse or building located behind the main structure. Despite the horrors we had just witnessed, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate further. As we approached, one thing immediately struck us as odd. At the front of the building, there was a small room with no door, just a single window. Inside, we could barely make out the shape of a large inverted cross hanging from the decaying ceiling. We continued around the building, arriving at the large garage-style entrance on the left side. This place mirrored the first one in some ways, another giant, empty room filled with trash and debris. But the most bizarre feature were the strange holes at the base of the walls. These were no ordinary marks. They looked deliberate, unnatural. Our flashlights flickered across them as we tried to make sense of what we were seeing. We decided it was time to leave. Just as we were about to head back outside, Mark's phone rang. It was Jim. As Mark spoke with him, his expression shifted dramatically, his face draining of color. I asked what was wrong, but the look on his face was enough to answer the question. He said in a hushed, fearful tone, "Someone else is here." Before we could even process what that meant, a white truck suddenly came speeding around the corner, barreling straight toward us. Panic set in, and we bolted toward my car. As we rounded the back corner of the building, we spotted another black truck parked nearby, but we didn't hesitate. We kept running as fast as we could. Luckily, the three of us made it back to my car without any more close calls. I have no idea what those guys in the trucks were up to or why they chased us, but given everything we had witnessed inside those buildings, I'm certain it wasn't good. We never found out, and we made sure never to return to that place. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I had transitioned into being a party planner and event coordinator. My job was to organize epic parties for a record label group, which meant renting out venues for weekends or nights to host our events. Usually, we wouldn't pay until after the events, with the venue owners taking a percentage of the profits. One time, my group rented a large warehouse for an entire weekend, planning to throw parties on both Friday and Saturday nights. Once we had the place, the setup was on me. I had to arrange tables for bottle service, set up portable bars, and create a DJ booth. There was a lot of work involved in transforming a bare warehouse into a party venue, but it was always worth it. These pop-up events were incredibly profitable. My buddy Jack, who was also part of the event planning team, helped me out. On the Wednesday before the party weekend, he drove a truck filled with equipment to the empty parking lot where the warehouse stood. I searched high and low for any electrical panel or circuit breaker box, but I couldn't seem to find one. I decided to call the building owner, Carter, who picked up almost immediately. He was quick to tell me exactly where to find the electrical panel that would turn on the lights I needed. He directed me to a door with an exit sign above it, but strangely, the sign wasn't lit. When I stepped through the door, I found myself in a cramped, narrow corridor. To one side, there was a door I assumed led to the outside, and to the other side, a half flight of stairs. I was supposed to head down these stairs into yet another tight space, which had a few doors. It's hard to describe the room properly without showing you. It was that cramped. At 6 feet 4 inches, I had to duck just to avoid bumping my head on the ceiling. It felt that cramped down there. The lighting was dim, like those faint night lights you find in hallways, just enough to see by. I found the electrical panel, and Carter gave me specific instructions on which switches to flip. Afterward, I shut the panel door and locked it with the key, though he had told me to just leave the key in the lock. As I hung up the call, a sudden loud buzzing noise started. It wasn't continuous, but came in short bursts. Following the sound, I found a door that led to a pitch-black room. Pulling it open was harder than I expected. It scraped loudly against the concrete floor. Inside, there was only a faint red light in the corner, which pulsed in sync with the buzzing noise. When the buzzing stopped, the light would flicker off, and when the buzzing started again, so did the light. I couldn't make sense of it. I stepped farther into the room, and as I moved, the light flickered back on and the buzzing resumed. When I stood still, it would stop. I don't know why, but something about it unsettled me. I quickly backed up to the doorway and looked one last time into the room. The red light turned on again, casting an eerie glow across the space. I decided to call Carter again to tell him about this strange issue with the light. Carter answered the phone with an unsettling calmness, explaining that the light was triggered by a motion sensor and that the buzzing noise was caused by a malfunction in the one in the basement. Confused, I asked what he meant by a motion sensor, and he explained that every room in the building had one as part of the security system. The idea didn't quite sink in, but I glanced back at the room, and the light was still glowing ominously. I asked what could be causing it to go off, but he had no clue. That's when I saw it. At first, I couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. All I saw was long hair, and it was sitting in the corner of the room, half hidden behind a stack of old boxes. The most unsettling part was its eyes, wide open, staring at me, almost glowing in the dim light. Its mouth stretched into what could only be described as a half smile. Then, it started moving its arm, almost as if beckoning me over. I froze. I know it took me a few moments to describe what I was seeing, but in reality, I was screaming in my head the whole time. Before I even knew what I was doing, I slammed the door shut and bolted up the stairs, rushing out through the exit. I grabbed Jack and yelled at him that we were leaving, and that we'd never step foot in that warehouse again. I didn't bother asking any more questions. I didn't care. This was Carter's problem now, not mine. I shouted at Jack to hurry up and get everything packed into the truck. We worked quickly, loading up the gear and getting out of there as fast as we could. I didn't even stop to lock the door. All I wanted was to be as far from that place as possible. To this day, I can't quite make sense of it. The way Carter seemed so calm when I told him about the person in the basement, it was unsettling. Looking back, I wonder if the light and buzzing were triggered by that person in the corner, waving me over, or whatever the hell it was doing with its arm. It was one of the most disturbing, nightmare-inducing experiences I've ever had.